We resume at the Pokémon World Playoffs, with Ash and Paul being led into the arena by Reggie. The boys look around for their first round opponents, with Ash barely being able to contain his excitement, though it is slightly marred by an annoying throbbing at the base of his skull, along with a faint buzzing in his ears. However, these minor annoyances are swiftly cast from his mind when Reggie announces that due to their previous battles, he and Paul have been fast-tracked to the finals. He also adds that he will be Ash's opponent, while another familiar voice states that he will be Paul's. Turning in the direction of the voice, Paul sees Brandon, who greets the sternest of the Veilstone brothers with a determined nod. Paul responds in kind, and the four trainers make their way onto the two side-by-side battlefields, as all around them, the crowd of thousands cheer Ash and Paul's names. Reggie and Brandon each go first, bringing out a Drapion and Regirock respectively, while Ash and Paul choose their starters. Brandon nods once more and praises Paul's clever use of type matchups, while Reggie tells Ash that they're going to make this a fun battle that neither of them will ever forget. The referee then calls for the battle to begin, and Paul immediately goes on the offensive with a Razor Leaf that deals serious damage to Regirock, while Ash has Piplup use a Bubble Beam, which clearly bothers Drapion. When Regirock struggles to retaliate, Paul has Turtwig switch up to Absorb, which binds the rock type in ethereal green tendrils, which begin sapping its strength, while Ash has Piplup leap over Drapion's retaliatory cross poison and get in close with a peck. This strikes hard against Drapion's chitinous thorax, leaving deep cracks that startle Reggie. He and Brandon then look at each other, both clearly despairing at how thoroughly the twins have them over a barrel, and after a moment, Brandon gives a grave nod. The elder pair then look back to Ash and Paul and admit that they didn't think it would come to this, but thanks to how far the boys have grown, they're going to use their ultimate Pokemon. Ash grins, while Paul asks what this Pokemon is, and in unison, Brandon and Reggie declare, Reggie Rapion. As if by invoking its name, Regirock and Drapion glide towards each other, and when they meet, begin blurring together as they start to occupy the same space. When its appearance refocuses, Ash and Paul see that Reggie Rapion is a fusion of Regirock and Drapion, possessing Drapion's scorpion-like body, though its shell is transformed to more closely resemble the boulders that make up Regirock's body, and its face is flattened, with its eyes and mouth morphing into the 7 blinking orange lights of Regirock's face. What's more, this Pokemon is big, far larger than either Regirock or Drapion, with its full height being several stories high the more Ash and Paul look at it. Compared to Reggie Rapion, Turtwig and Piplup seem shockingly small and weak. When the fused behemoth lets out a cry, the arena shakes, knocking both starters off their feet. But they do not stay down long, instead scrambling back to their feet and running in between the legs of their trainers, both of whom share a similar look of horror as they stare up at Reggie Rapion's gargantuan face. However, in contrast, the pair of starters have determined looks on their faces, and as if manifesting that determination, they both begin to glow and transform. At first, their bodies begin to change shape into that of their middle stage evolutions, Prinplup and Groddle, but even this does not seem to satisfy the starters, and so before their glow can dim even slightly, they undergo a second spontaneous evolution into Empoleon and Torterra. Through their rapid growth, both Ash and Paul are knocked off their feet and onto their respective Pokemon's shoulders, though this proves to be fortuitous, as even now that they have become Empoleon and Torterra, the starters aren't done, and with a pair of mighty cries, grow in size until they match Reggie Rapion. All around them, the crowd goes wild, as Paul climbs the tree on Torterra's back, which is as large as an ancient redwood, and Ash clutches tight to one of the prongs sticking out of Empoleon's head. When both are secure in their vantage point, the twins lock eyes and give each other a nod which their Pokemon have no trouble interpreting, leaping forward and smashing their bodies into Reggie Rapion with a crash that sounds like rolling thunder. From the rock behemoth's shoulder, Reggie tells his brothers that they've raised their Pokemon well for them to be able to pull off a double evolution, while on the other shoulder, Brandon calls that he'll reserve his praise for if they can withstand Reggie Rapion's counterattack, before ordering a rock tomb. Suddenly, jagged stone outcrops burst up on all sides of Torterra and Empoleon, boxing them in before slowly starting to sink back into the ground, dragging the starters down with them. Distantly, the twins hear a commentator question whether this is the end for the intrepid young challengers, but neither are willing to give up, not when the title of World Champion Pokémon Master is on the line. From the outside, Reggie and Brandon watch as it seems that Empoleon and Torterra are doomed to failure, but then a fearsome rumbling fills the arena, and in unison, both rock tombs shatter into dust, with Empoleon escaping with an Aqua Jet, while Torterra shreds the stone with Magical Leaf. Both attacks strike true on Reggie Rapion's chest, leaving behind an indent, which causes a layer of rock to crumble away, exposing a soft underside. Ash and Paul both know that this is their chance to end this, and so when Empoleon comes skidding back to Torterra's side, they call for a Hydro Pump and Solar Beam combo. At once, the final stage starters fire the pair of attacks from their mouths, which come together and intertwine to create a blue and green Helix Blast, which hits Reggie Rapion's weak point, with enough force that the giant rock scorpion is knocked off its feet, and as it hits the ground, it shrinks and defuses back into Drapion and Regirock, both of whom are unconscious. Empoleon and Torterra then shrink as well, reverting back into Piplup and Turtwig, and when the twins are back on solid ground once more, they fist bump to celebrate their victory. Only when the adrenaline of the battle fades does Ash notice the faint buzzing and throbbing are still there. However, once more he ignores this, as champion Cynthia steps onto the field and approaches the boys, with Brandon and Reggie falling in step right beside her. In her hands, Cynthia has a pair of large golden trophies, each proclaiming Ash and Paul as Pokémon Masters, but when Ash reaches out to touch his trophy, a shiver runs down his spine. Suddenly, a splitting pain rips through Ash's brain once more, and as he jerks his head up, his eyes fall on Cynthia's face. But it's not Cynthia's face. It's a purple face, with wide yellow eyes and a jagged grin. That sinister face then giggles, before a flash of purple turns it back into the smiling face of the champ. With concern, Cynthia asks Ash if he's alright, adding that he looks like he's seen a ghost, and as she speaks, Ash feels a calming energy pressing down and trying to smother his anxieties. However, this time it is not enough to settle the youth, and he turns to Piplup to ask if it can see what he's seeing. But to his shock, Piplup is gone. In its place is swirling fog. In fact, now Ash can see that the fog is all around him, and the once vibrant stadium has fallen silent as the grave. Reggie and Brandon are also gone, and Cynthia seems to be shifting rapidly between the appearance of the champion and a purple floating shape with those horrible yellow eyes. And to make matters worse, that pounding has gotten harder, while the buzzing is now so loud that he can barely hear himself think. Turning to face Paul, he now sees that his brother's eyes are vacant and his expression slack. Yelling at Paul to snap out of it, Paul turns to Ash, though his rebuke sounds fuzzy and far away, as if they are calling to each other from across a street. Though at last, something has become clear, and it's the buzzing in his ears, which has finally gotten loud and clear enough that Ash can identify as 3 words, repeated over and over again. Wake up, please. For a moment, those words mean nothing, but then, as if pushing through molasses, meaning bursts into Ash's mind, and he realizes that if someone is trying to wake him, then that means he must be Ash jerks awake, rising to a sitting position, as adrenaline stronger than he felt during the battle courses through his entire body. Looking around, he sees that he is in a field, with Paul still asleep beside him. Not too far behind them is that old shrine gate they tried to pass under to get out of the rain, and a little ways ahead, that purple monster with yellow eyes is engaged in a battle with a blue Pokémon that Ash is pretty sure is a Lucario. Confusion makes his head ache even more than it already had been, and then the worst shock yet comes when he feels a hand on his shoulder. Jumping back in fright, Ash sees a young man with dark spiky hair, a kind face, and dressed in a tasteful blue blazer and matching hat. The blue blazer man then apologizes for startling Ash, and introduces himself as Riley, saying that he noticed him and his brother asleep in the field, being fed on by Miss Magus, and felt compelled to step in. Ash thanks him, then turns his attention to Paul, yelling for him to wake up. Paul is unsurprisingly unresponsive, and Riley begins to fret that maybe it's already too late, and Paul has fallen too deeply into slumber. But Ash isn't so sure, grinning that he knows his twin better than anyone, and he might have a way to get Paul's attention. Leaning in close to his brother's ear, Ash flashes a cheeky grin, then yells that he woke up first, so that's another area where Paul's second best to him. Like a light being flicked on, Paul is awake and sitting, his face frozen in furious shock, while his pupils are like pinpricks. Ash chuckles that he knew Paul couldn't take a taunt like that lying down, and even Riley can't help but laugh slightly, saying that though his methods are undeniably unconventional, they get results. He then gets Paul up to speed on the current situation, but Paul needs little prompting, surmising the basics from a quick scan of his surroundings, and when he hears what Miss Magus is capable of, he is on his feet in an instant, telling Turtwig to stand by for battle. With Miss Magus distracted by its continued scuffle with Lucario, Turtwig is able to attack from behind with a bite that does super effective damage. This in turn draws Mismagius' attention away from Lucario, thus allowing the Aura Pokemon to get off a Metal Claw, which knocks the floating ghost type into the dirt. Paul wastes no time allowing Mismagius to get back up, and so instead has his Turtwig bite it again, this time making the downed ghost flinch, and allowing Turtwig to bite it once more before Paul hurls a Pokeball which smacks into Mismagius' head and rattles thrice before coming to a stop. As Paul stomps over to collect the 6th member of his team, Ash berates his brother for fighting dirty, striking a distracted foe from behind and attacking while it's down, but Paul just tells him to stop being stupid, since Mismagius clearly wasn't above putting them to sleep before attacking. He then adds that speaking of sleep, now that he has Mismagius he doesn't need Stantler anymore since its hypnosis simply can't compare. However, Riley interjects that if Paul is willing to listen, he happens to know a secret technique that only Stantler can learn, which has been forgotten to time, and which, if properly utilised, could give Stantler a whole new role on Paul's team. Paul gives a jerk of his head as if telling Riley to continue, and he elaborates that the move is called Psyshield Bash, and in essence is about gathering up the user's aura in front of them to both defend and attack, making it a useful and versatile move. Paul scoffs at the term aura, muttering something under his breath that sounds remarkably like ridiculous. However, Riley is unfazed by this rudeness, assuring the young man that aura is very real, and that with enough hard work, both humans and Pokemon can harness it. In fact, the reason he found the boys in the first place is because he could sense that both have very potent auras, though with a grimace he admits that he also sensed that something has clouded Paul's aura, closing him off, which is why he had an easier time reaching Ash in the dream world. Paul scowls at this claim, but Ash grins that must have been the voice asking him to wake up. Riley nods, and Ash continues that he must have also been the one who told him to remember at the start of the dream. At this, Riley gives the youth a baffled look, saying he never asked Ash to remember anything. His message was always about waking up, and besides, based on the timing, he was still tracing their auras and hadn't actually come across them yet. Ash frowns, but upon reflection agrees, saying that the voice that asked him to remember sounded different than Riley's, much younger. This causes Riley's mouth to fall open in a comedic "oh." He begins muttering to himself that it's highly improbable, but at the same time, it's the only explanation that makes sense. Then, without another word, Riley unslings his backpack and pulls open the drawstring to reveal an egg. Urgently, he tells Ash to lay a hand on the egg and tell him what he feels. Ash obeys, and as soon as his fingers touch the shell, he gasps, having a strong sense of déjà vu, as the feeling that accompanied the request to remember begins emanating from the egg. Riley looks on expectantly, and when Ash explains, the man in the blue blazer smiles that he suspected as much. He then goes on to explain that inside that egg is a Riolu, the unevolved form of Lucario, and another Pokemon strong with aura. If his theory is right, then the Riolu in that egg sensed Ash's aura in distress even before he did, and so reached out, forming an aura bond with him in the process. Ash asks what this means, and Riley just hands him the egg, saying that the two of them are forever bonded. This makes Ash beam and thank Riley before thanking the egg for trying to help him. While off to the side, Paul grumbles that this all sounds like magic mumbo-jumbo to him, though if Riley's giving stuff away, he'd like the details of this Psyshield Bash attack. Riley chuckles that Paul is lucky he's here rather than his old master, since he never tolerated any impetuousness, but nonetheless, he produces a pen and paper on which he writes a series of instructions annotated with a few rough diagrams meant to demonstrate poses. He then hands it over to Paul, saying that he hopes it will help him get a better understanding of aura, and that this understanding will help him cleanse his own aura of whatever is clouding it. Paul doesn't reply, but does give an appreciative nod for the notes, which seems to please Riley. He then asks if they're on their way to Oreburgh City, since he's headed there, and if they want they could travel together and he could give them a few lessons on harnessing aura. However, the boys shake their heads, saying that they're on their way to Hearthome City for their third gym battle. Riley nods his understanding, saying that he's actually bound for the Oreburgh gym to see his old friend Byron. Ash tells him to give Byron their regards, and Riley promises to do just that, before seeing them off with a wave. Little of note occurs over the next few days as the brothers continue on foot towards Hearthome City, though at night, both train with more fervour than they ever had before. For Paul, this training takes the form of trying to teach Stantler Psyshield Bash. As in all things, he is an unyielding perfectionist, who gives curt, clipped instructions and looks harshly upon failure. However, Stantler is used to this style of instruction, and so gives its all to attaining this new skill, and by extension justifying its place on Paul's team, since Paul has made no secret of the fact that unless it starts showing progress soon, it's going the way of his former Starly. He also turns special attention towards Miss Magus, testing the limits of its power, as well as teaching it a few new attacks to make it a truly devastating addition to his team. Though all of this is done far away from camp, at Ash's request, since he still finds the way Miss Magus looks at him unnerving. Speaking of Ash, though he knows what he saw in the Pokémon World Playoffs arena was all an illusion, the sight of Piplup evolving still has filled him with excitement, and so he spends most nights having it spar with Luxio, Geodude and Staravia to help it reach that next stage. The other focus of his training is more personal, and so each night when his brother and Pokemon have all fallen asleep, he pulls out Riolu's egg and tries to channel Aura to connect with it like they did when he was asleep. Though he can definitely feel something every time he lays a hand on the egg, he's unable to deepen their bond beyond that without any experience or teachings in the way of Aura. At times, he wishes that he had suggested backtracking to Auraberg so that he and Paul could have taken up Riley on his offer of instruction. But a few days later, when the skyline of Hearthome City comes into view, all regret is promptly forgotten. Stopping off at the Pokemon Center to get their Pokemon healed before their gym battle, Ash and Paul are met by a familiar face, Maylene. When she sees them, she greets Ash warmly and Paul less so. Ash excitedly asks the girl if she's here to challenge the Hearthome gym, but she chuckles that she actually just beat it, pulling out her badge case to show off a shiny relic badge, though she does admit Fantini is the toughest gym leader she's faced, saying it took her 2 tries to beat her powerful ghost types. Paul scowls that being stronger than her and actually being strong are 2 very different things, so he's not that worried, but now he knows what type of Pokemon this gym leader uses, it'll make formulating his strategy even easier. Maylene gives her rival an angry pout, but Ash pats her shoulder, saying not to let him get under her skin. Maylene then takes notice of Ash properly for the first time, becoming especially curious about the egg in his arms. Ash explains the story of meeting Riley, and when he tells her that it's a Riolu egg, Maylene's eyes light up, and she tells him that she recently caught a Riolu, and when it hatches, she'd love to have a battle. Ash says it's a deal, and the pair give each other a nod, establishing their own little rivalry, before Maylene collects her Pokemon from Nurse Joy and bids the brothers farewell. Not long after, Ash and Paul's Pokemon are given Nurse Joy's seal of approval, and so they head over to the gym, though what they find looks more like a cathedral than somewhere meant for Pokemon battles. Either way, the boys enter and are greeted by a tall, glamorous woman dressed in purple regalia from her hair to her shoes. She tells them that she is Fantina, mistress of the Hearthome gym, and beckons whichever one of them means to challenge her to step forward. In unison, the twins take a step forward, then look to each other in annoyance, with Ash declaring that Paul got to go first last time, and Paul shrugging that if Ash is gonna whine like a baby about it, then he can go first, but not to blame him if he gets creamed because he ran headlong into this battle. Ash grins that the only one who's getting creamed is Fantina, since he's gonna sweep this gym 3-0, just like Paul did in Eterna City, and in response, Paul just rolls his eyes and takes a seat in the stands. When it comes time for the battle to begin, Fantina opens the battle with her Gengar, while Ash decides to play this smart and brings out Geodude, knowing that Gengar's poison typing gives it a weakness to Geodude's ground attacks. Geodude is excited to be Ash's first choice for a gym battle, and so aims to impress its trainer by going all out when he calls for a bulldoze. However, this makes Fantina smirk, and she gives no instruction to her Pokemon, allowing Geodude to charge in, slam into Gengar, and then pass right through it. This makes Ash yell out in shock, while Geodude breaks sharply in midair and pivots to face Gengar once more, but the ghost only giggles mischievously, as Fantina elaborates that in theory, Bulldoze was a clever tactical decision, but in practice it failed due to Gengar's ability, Levitate, which makes all ground-type moves null and void. She then gives Gengar its first command at last, and it is Icy Wind. Vanishing from view, Gengar reappears behind Geodude and blasts it with a frosty gale which blows the feisty boulder to the other side of the battlefield. Next, Ash calls for Geodude to use Rollout, but once more Gengar is one step ahead, leaping over the incoming Rollout, and then to add insult to injury, running atop it like a circus performer. Desperately, Ash tells Geodude to stop, but the rock type is locked into this attack, and so Gengar is able to have some fun, doing tricks as it runs atop Geodude, like spinning in place and doing handstands. This makes Fantina smile fondly, but also lightly rebuke her Pokemon that this is a gym match, not a contest battle, so it should return to the task at hand. With a melancholic sigh, Gengar acquiesces, tumbling forward and swallowing Geodude whole. For a moment, Geodude bounces around in Gengar's mouth, trying to use its rollout, but on Fantina's command, Gengar uses Icy Wind again, spitting out a frost-covered Geodude who smacks into a wall and tumbles to the ground unconscious. Gritting his teeth, Ash recalls Geodude and says that he's not licked yet, since now Fantina will need to compete against his fastest friend before bringing out Luxio. Wasting no time, Ash has Luxio use Bite, and the Spark Pokemon charges forward at blistering speed. However, just as it is about to sink its teeth into Gengar's arm, the Ghost type melts into the floor, inhabiting Luxio's shadow, before just as speedily popping up and lodging a Shadow Punch into the Electric type's stomach. This makes Luxio inhale sharply, but its will to fight is still strong, and so it uses Spark, causing the electricity to radiate out from its fur, zapping Gengar and forcing it out of its shadow. As the Ghost type retakes its usual form, Luxio comes round for another bite, but Gengar is not finished with its bag of tricks yet, and so simply begins floating up into the air and out of Luxio's reach. With a fierce cry, Luxio leaps up to pursue its foe, but up in the air, Gengar has a clear advantage, and so puts this to good use by easily maneuvering out of the way of the bite attack and retaliating with a Nightshade to the back. Luxio howls piteously as it thuds to the ground, but even still it remains resolute, snarling at Gengar to come back down and face it in an honourable duel, but Gengar giggles in a way that makes it abundantly clear that it has no intention of giving up its advantage. Then, to truly hammer this point home, begins a barrage of Nightshades. Desperately, Luxio is forced to flee the onslaught, while Ash tries to formulate a plan to overcome Gengar, but against such overwhelming speed and strength, it can only last so long. The first sign of doom comes when an errant Nightshade strikes Luxio in the hind leg, slowing its run as it is reduced to a limp, and then from there it only gets worse, with more and more blasts striking the electric type on the back and flank before finally one hits on top of Luxio's head and it tumbles to the dirt unconscious. Thanking Luxio for an amazing effort and telling it to get a good rest, Ash returns his first capture to its ball. He then looks over to Fantina, who is regarding him with something like pity, and he frowns when she says there's no shame in surrender if he would like to leave and come back to challenge her another day. However, without a second thought, Ash refuses the notion outright, saying he still has one more Pokemon, and while this is true, he knows that neither Staravia nor Piplup know any moves that could do much against a Gengar, who has so easily demolished two of his Pokemon while barely taking any damage in return. He then turns his eyes to Paul, who gives him a scrutinizing look, and Ash tastes bile as he remembers his brother's words about rushing into this fight. But even still, this just makes his resolve burn brighter, since there's no way he's gonna prove Paul right if he can help it. And so, in spite of the long odds, he pulls the third and final ball from his belt and hurls it into the ring, declaring that he's counting on Piplup to help him turn this around. With a proud chirp, Piplup bursts into action, and at Ash's order flies at Gengar for a peck attack. Gengar responds with a Shadow Punch, but thanks to the bond between trainer and starter, Ash is able to let out a cry in time for Piplup to drop from the air and slide on its belly, pecking Gengar on the leg instead, while avoiding the punch. It then lets loose a volley of bubbles into the Ghost type's side, which makes it grimace and recoil. However, Ash has no intention of letting Gengar retreat and regroup, and so calls for another Bubble Beam to keep it off balance. Though with range once more on its side, Gengar is able to counter with Nightshade, causing the attacks to clash in midair and come to a stalemate, with neither side being able to break the deadlock. Knowing that this could be the deciding clash, both Ash and Fantina call for their Pokemon to go all out here. In response, both Piplup and Gengar let out hearty cries and push all the reserves of strength they have left into their all-out attacks. Despite having faced Geodude and Luxio already, it seems that Gengar still has more power than Piplup, as slowly but surely, Nightshade begins to overpower Bubble Beam. But then, just when it seems like it's all over for Ash, Piplup begins to glow, and as evolutionary energy bathes the bird Pokemon, its power increases tenfold, pushing Nightshade back to the point of a stalemate, and then even further towards Gengar. But, just as quickly as the evolution began, so does it end, with Piplup throwing its wings out wide as if trying to shrug off an unwelcome weight, before looking at its flippers and sighing in relief to see them unchanged. However, this relief is short-lived, since by putting its effort into stopping its own evolution, Piplup has stopped producing bubbles as well, allowing Nightshade to burst through those already on the field, before shooting forward unopposed and striking Piplup square in the chest. With a shriek of shock and pain, Piplup is launched backwards, where it slams into the gym wall with enough force to leave a crater, and when it falls forward, it is unconscious. Distantly, Ash hears the referee call the match in Fantina's favour, but it is largely drowned out by the ringing in his ears. He lost. And that's where we'll leave things. How will Ash handle his first gym defeat? Will Paul fare any better when it comes time to face the fearsome ghost-type gym leader? And why did Piplup decide to suddenly cancel its own evolution? Find out when the journey continues.